When I married Travis Ward, I thought I hit the jackpot of love. He was the kind of man who opened doors, remembered anniversaries, and always kissed me goodbye before work. He wasn't rich, but he was steady, kind, and had this calm voice that made me believe everything would be fine no matter what. Our wedding was small, just family, a few friends, and a cheap cake that leaned to one side because my cousin decided to save money and bake it herself. But that day, I didn't care. I wasn't marrying a cake. I was marrying my best friend. When Travis slid the ring on my finger, his hand shook a little, and he whispered, "You're my forever." I smiled and said, "You'd better mean that." And he laughed the way he always did when he didn't know what else to say. We started our life in a little rental house just outside Nashville. It had squeaky floors, a leaky faucet, and a porch swing that creaked every time the wind blew. But to me, it was perfect. We made dinner together, stayed up talking about our future, and sometimes fell asleep on the couch halfway through a movie. On Sundays, we'd walk to church, holding hands like two people who still believed love could fix anything. The first few years were full of small joys, birthday surprises, road trips with bad motel coffee, and long nights planning baby names. We wanted kids more than anything. Every time I saw a family at the park, I'd imagine us there someday, Travis pushing a stroller, me trying to keep the baby from eating dirt. It became our favorite daydream. But dreams can turn into pressure when months turn into years. After the second year of marriage with no baby news, the tone of family conversations started to change. At first, it was subtle, little hints from his mother, Marjorie. "Have you seen a doctor yet?" she'd ask in that sweet, poisonous tone Southern mothers master so well. "Sometimes women just need a little help, dear." I smiled politely, but inside, I wanted to throw her little help right back at her. Travis always told me to ignore her. "She means well," he'd say, even though both of us knew she didn't. But as time went on, his patience with her comments grew thinner, and so did his patience with me. I noticed how he stopped joining me for our nightly talks. He used to tell me everything, about his job, his coworkers, even random jokes he heard during the day. Now, he just came home, ate in silence, and scrolled through his phone like it was more interesting than anything I had to say. One night, I brought up the baby topic again. I said maybe we should both get checked, just to make sure everything's okay. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Maybe the problem isn't me," he said flatly. That sentence hit like a slap. I just stared at him. He looked up finally, and for a split second, there was guilt in his eyes. But then he shrugged and said, "Forget it. I'm tired. Forget it. I wish I could have. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mom. I just carried that hurt in silence because I didn't want to admit my forever might be cracking. We still went to church, still smiled for Christmas photos, still said, 'I love you' out of habit. But something was off. Our house felt different. It wasn't home anymore. It was quiet, cold, like we were both pretending not to see the growing distance. I tried to fix things, romantic dinners, surprise notes, all the little things that used to make him laugh. He'd thank me politely, kiss me on the forehead, and go right back to checking his phone. That phone became my biggest competition. Sometimes I'd hear it buzz after midnight, and when I asked, he said it was work. I believed him, because when you love someone, you want to believe them. You want to believe forever still means forever. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, like a thread unraveling from the life we had built. I'd lie awake next to him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering if the man beside me was already halfway gone. I remember one particular morning. He was rushing out the door, tie crooked, coffee spilling on the counter. I told him, "You forgot your lunch." He turned back just long enough to say, "I'll grab something later." And then, without even thinking, I said, "I miss us." He paused at the door, like he'd heard it, but didn't know what to do with it. Then he said, "I miss us too. but it sounded like a line he was tired of repeating. That was the first time I realized forever might have an expiration date. And yet, I still clung to hope. Because when you've built your life on love, you don't notice when the foundation starts to crack. You just keep painting over it, pretending it's still solid. If you've ever loved someone who slowly turned into a stranger, you know that silence can scream louder than any fight. By the way, if this story already feels a little too real, let me know in the comments. I read them all. Tell me where you're watching from or share your own story. And if you love real-life cheating and revenge stories, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next one. The thing about betrayal is, it doesn't hit you all at once. It sneaks in quietly, disguised as routine, hiding behind "I'm tired" and "it's just work." You don't see it coming, until one day it's standing right in front of you, smiling like nothing ever changed. The silence between us started to feel like a third person living in our house. I'd walk into the kitchen in the morning and hear the coffee maker sputtering, but not a single word from Travis. It was like we'd both agreed to stop talking, just to avoid making things worse. His mom didn't help. Every Sunday dinner at Marjorie's house felt like an interrogation. She'd ask questions that sounded polite, but carried knives under the tablecloth. "So, Elena, any news yet?" I'd force a smile. "Not yet, but we're hopeful." Marjorie would sigh dramatically. "Hope is good, but at some point, a man needs a child, don't you think?" Travis never said a word to stop her. He'd just cut his steak like the conversation wasn't happening. That silence spoke louder than anything. After dinner, on the drive home, I tried to bring it up. "You could have said something." He shrugged. "She's just worried." "You know how she is." "No," I said quietly. "I know how you are now." He didn't answer. That's when I realized something important about marriage. It doesn't collapse all at once. It chips away, piece by piece, until one day you wake up next to someone you don't recognize. The next few months, the tension thickened. We stopped praying together. He stopped kissing me goodbye. He started coming home late, saying work was keeping him busy. At first, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. One night, I found him sitting on the couch, staring at his phone with a look I hadn't seen before, guilt. I asked, "Is everything okay?" He jumped like I'd caught him doing something. "Yeah, just work stuff." He flipped the phone face down and went to bed. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between his breaths. I knew something was off, but I didn't know what. And that not knowing was worse than any truth could have been. A week later, his coworkers threw a small office barbecue. He told me not to come because it was just a casual thing. Of course, I showed up anyway, because that's what wives do when they feel their marriage slipping through their fingers. That's the first time I saw her. She was standing too close to him, laughing at things that weren't funny. Sierra Kane. Younger, flashier, full of confidence I used to have. She touched his arm when she talked, and he didn't move away. He didn't even look guilty. I stayed just long enough to see him pour her a drink before I quietly left. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, just numb. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. "You okay?" he asked casually while pouring coffee. I looked at him and said, "I saw you last night." He froze, spoon halfway to his cup. "What are you talking about?" "Sierra, the way you looked at her, the way she looked at you," he sighed. "You're overreacting." "No," I said, steady but shaking inside. "I'm not blind." He slammed his mug down and muttered, "You're making problems that don't exist." Then he grabbed his keys and left. That's when it hit me. I'd lost my husband long before I caught him. The days that followed were a blur. He came home late every night, smelling like cheap perfume and excuses. I stopped waiting up. I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying. But then, one evening, Marjorie called. "Elena, she said in a tone that almost sounded kind. "You should stop stressing my son out." Men don't like to feel trapped, I wanted to scream, but instead I said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Ward." "I'm learning," and I hung up. Learning. That word stayed in my head all night. I was learning how to live without him, how to talk less, feel less, expect less. The house got quieter, the bed got colder, and one night, while I was doing laundry, I found a hotel receipt in his pants pocket. It wasn't even hidden, like he didn't care if I saw it. The name on it made my stomach twist. The Brentwood Inn. The date was just 3 days ago. I sat on the floor with that piece of paper in my hand, feeling everything and nothing all at once. When he came home that night, I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just handed him the receipt. He looked at it, then looked at me. "You went through my stuff?" I laughed, bitter and tired. "That's your response?" He rubbed his face. "I can't do this right now." And just like that, he walked away. Again. I sat there for hours, surrounded by half-folded laundry, realizing that silence had finally done its job. It had destroyed us. When I finally crawled into bed, I noticed something strange. His wedding ring was gone. Maybe he took it off at work. Maybe he forgot to put it back on. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew. It wasn't mine anymore. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast. I didn't say goodbye. I just watched him leave and wondered when exactly he'd decided that our marriage was optional. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come crashing through the door. It just slips quietly into your life, sits at your table, and makes itself comfortable. And it was already sitting in mine. The next few weeks, I tried to convince myself that the receipt I found didn't mean what I thought it did. People stay at hotels for work all the time, right? Except Travis wasn't traveling for work. And he definitely wasn't sleeping in our bed anymore. At least, not in the same way. He started shaving more often, wearing cologne he'd never used before, and suddenly cared a lot about what shirt looked better. He'd stare at his reflection longer than I ever had the patience to. When I asked what was going on, he said, "Just trying to look professional." Professional, sure. One Friday, he came home later than usual, close to midnight. I asked where he'd been, and he said, "Drinks with the team." I nodded, pretending to buy it, but something about the way he avoided eye contact told me there was more to the story. He dropped his jacket on the couch, and his phone slid out of the pocket. The screen lit up with a text that said, "Had a great time tonight." Same place next week? The contact name? Sierra K. My hands froze before I even touched the phone. I didn't need to open it. I didn't need more proof. The truth was right there in the glow of that message. When he noticed me looking, he snatched the phone so fast it nearly fell. "You shouldn't go through my stuff," he snapped. "I didn't," I said. "It just fell out." "Yeah, sure," he muttered. "You never trust me." And that was the moment I realized something sickening. Cheaters always flip the blame before you even get to ask the question. For the next few days, I walked around like a ghost. I cooked, cleaned, smiled at my students, and came home to a stranger. I wanted to scream, but instead, I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence is the only way to survive the noise. But pretending takes energy, and mine was running out. One night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Hi, is this Elena?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Sierra. I think we need to talk." I went cold. "About what?" She sighed like she was bored. "About Travis. You're his wife, right?" "Well, I'm the woman he actually wants." For a second, I thought it was a prank, but her voice was too smug to be fake. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "I just think you deserve to know," she said sweetly. "He told me he's done with you." "I'm pregnant, and we're starting a family. That last part hit me like a brick. I didn't say a word. I just ended the call. My knees gave out before I even reached the couch. Pregnant. She said she was pregnant. When Travis came home later that night, I didn't even let him take his shoes off. Is she pregnant? I asked. He froze in the doorway. Who? Don't play dumb, Travis. Sierra. She called me, his face drained of color. He didn't even bother to deny it. He just said, "You shouldn't have answered." What does that even mean? I shouted. He rubbed his forehead like I was the problem. Elena, I didn't plan for this, but it happened. She's having my child. I just stared at him, the words echoing in my head. She's having my child. I'd spent years praying for a baby, and now he was giving that miracle to someone else. I can't keep living like this, he said, not even looking at me. You deserve someone who can give you a family. I've made my decision your decision? My voice cracked. You don't get to decide for both of us. Elena, please, he said softly, like pity would fix it. Don't make this harder. Harder? Harder than this? I laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. It was the kind that comes when your body's too broken to cry. You're unbelievable. You walk out on me, and I'm supposed to make it easy for you? He sighed again, picked up his duffel bag, and said, I'll send someone for my things. That's how it ended. No shouting, no slamming doors. Just the quiet sound of zippers, and the man I thought was forever walking out into the night. The next morning, I woke up and half expected to find him back, like it was all a nightmare, but the side of the bed was cold, and his toothbrush was gone. I sat there staring at the empty space beside me, realizing this was real. He'd chosen her, the woman who had everything I didn't: youth, confidence, a so-called baby. For the first time in my life, I didn't pray. I didn't know what to say. Later that week, Marjorie showed up at my door. She didn't even knock, just walked right in like she still had a say in my life. Elena, she said with that fake sympathy. Travis told me what happened. Maybe it's for the best. A man needs a child. I looked at her, dead calm. You must be proud. You finally got your wish. She flinched, but recovered quickly. You'll move on. Maybe this is God's way of... I cut her off. Don't bring God into this. She didn't come by again. Days turned into weeks. I stopped checking my phone. Every time it buzzed, I felt that same cold dread. I didn't want his apology, his excuses, or his updates about Sierra's pregnancy. I just wanted peace. At night, I'd lie awake and imagine them together. Him holding her belly, smiling the way he used to with me. The picture burned in my mind like poison. But here's the thing about pain. It changes shape. At first, it crushes you. Then, it hardens into something else, something you can stand on. I didn't know it yet, but that same pain would soon lead me somewhere I never expected. It wouldn't be pretty, and it wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. The night he left still plays in my head like a movie I never asked to watch. The air was thick with that kind of silence that only happens when two people know it's over, but can't admit it out loud. Travis came home late, as usual, but this time he didn't bother pretending he'd been at work. His shirt smelled like a different perfume, floral and expensive, the kind you don't find at the drugstore. He walked past me like I was invisible, dropped his keys on the counter, and said, "We need to talk." My hands started shaking before he even said the words. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Sierra's pregnant," he said flatly, "and I'm going to be with her." I stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was a cruel joke. None came. "You're leaving me?" I asked quietly. He nodded once, like it was just another decision, like he was choosing a new car, not walking away from a marriage. Something inside me cracked. After everything? After all we've been through? Elna, please, he said, sounding annoyed. No, don't make this harder than it already is. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Harder? You think I'm the one making this hard? He sighed, like he was exhausted from my emotions. You'll be fine. You're strong. You'll get over it. That line nearly broke me, because he meant it. He thought I'd just get over it. Travis, I said, my voice shaking. What happened to forever? He looked down, avoiding my eyes. Forever doesn't always mean what we think it does. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to cry in front of him. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I straightened up and said, Then go! Take your forever and get out. He didn't argue. He grabbed his duffel bag, already packed, and walked toward the door. He hesitated for half a second, maybe waiting for me to beg him to stay. I didn't. He looked disappointed. The door closed behind him with a soft click. That sound was worse than any slam. It was quiet, final, and cruel. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the door, half expecting him to come back and say he'd made a mistake. But the house stayed silent. When I finally moved, it wasn't to chase after him. It was to pick up the ring he'd left on the coffee table. His wedding band, sitting there like a tiny piece of metal that used to mean everything. I held it in my hand, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if I wanted to throw it out the window or wear it again, just to pretend none of this was real. I ended up putting it in a drawer, the one where I kept all the things that hurt too much to throw away. That night, I sat on the couch with the lights off. I didn't cry right away. I think I was too shocked to cry. But when it hit hard. The kind of crying that comes from deep inside, the kind you can't stop once it starts. I remember whispering into the dark, Why her? Why not me? The worst part wasn't losing him. It was realizing he'd already emotionally left months ago. This was just the official notice. The next morning, the world didn't care that my marriage had ended. The sun still rose, the neighbors still watered their lawns, and I still had to show up to work. I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized myself. Puffy eyes, pale skin, hair in a mess. But I went to work anyway, because falling apart doesn't pay the bills. Halfway through my first class, a secretary knocked on the door and handed me an envelope. My name was typed neatly on the front. I didn't even need to open it to know what it was. Divorce papers. I signed them the next day, mostly because I didn't have the energy to fight. I'd already lost. After that, everything blurred together. People asking questions I didn't want to answer. Friends trying to comfort me with lines like, "You deserve better," and "God has a plan." I smiled, nodded, and pretended those words didn't make me want to scream. At night, I lay in bed staring at the empty space next to me, trying to understand how something that once felt eternal could disappear so fast. 2 weeks later, I drove by the Brentwood Inn, the name from the receipt I'd found. His truck was parked there. I should have kept driving, but instead, I parked across the street and watched. A few minutes later, Sierra walked out of the lobby, her hand resting on her stomach, like she was proud of it. Travis followed, carrying her bag. He looked happy. He looked free. I sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. That was the first time I realized the difference between heartbreak and humiliation. Heartbreak hurts. Humiliation burns. I went home that night and deleted every photo of us. Wedding pictures, anniversary selfies, everything. But when I got to the folder marked "Our Future Baby Names," I couldn't bring myself to delete it. I opened it, saw names like Ethan, Grace, Lucas, and lost it. I fell to the floor, sobbing until I couldn't breathe. I screamed into a pillow just to muffle the sound, because as much as I wanted to hate him, a small part of me still loved the man I thought he was. When the tears finally stopped, I got up, washed my face, and looked in the mirror again. I didn't see the same woman from my wedding day. I saw someone stronger, colder, sharper. Someone who had nothing left to lose. I made myself a promise right there. If life was going to break me, I'd make sure I came back stronger than before. The next morning, I packed a few bags and drove to my mother's house in Knoxville. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the door and said, "Welcome home." That's when it finally hit me. I wasn't just leaving a man. I was leaving behind the version of myself who still believed he'd ever loved me. The first month after Travis left felt like walking through fog. I existed, but I wasn't really living. Every day was just about surviving, getting out of bed, going to work, pretending I was okay. People said things like, "You'll bounce back," as if heartbreak was something you could walk off like a twisted ankle. I kept telling myself that if I stayed busy, the pain would fade. So, I worked more hours, cleaned every corner of my mother's house, and pretended I didn't see his name when it popped up on social media. He wasn't just moving on, he was building a new life, and I wasn't in it. Then one morning, while brushing my teeth, I nearly fainted. I blamed it on skipping breakfast, but when it happened again the next day, my mom raised an eyebrow and said, "Elena, maybe you should see a doctor." I brushed it off, but something in me whispered otherwise. At the clinic, I sat in that cold exam room staring at the motivational poster on the wall. Every ending is a new beginning. Yeah, sure. Easy to say when it's not your life in ruins. When the nurse came back in, she was smiling a little too warmly. "Congratulations," she said. "You're about 7 weeks pregnant." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. "Pregnant?" I repeated. She nodded, still smiling. "Yes, ma'am." I sat there frozen, my brain trying to process the words. Pregnant. It didn't make sense. Travis was gone, I was alone, and the last thing I expected was a baby. The nurse kept talking about vitamins and appointments, but her voice faded into static. My mind was already spinning. When I finally stepped outside, the world looked different. Too bright, too loud, too real. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I wasn't angry, I wasn't happy, I was numb. That night, I told my mom. Her eyes widened, but she didn't say a word. After a long pause, she asked softly, "Does he know?" I shook my head. "And he doesn't need to." "Elena?" "No, Mom, he made his choice. This one's mine." She didn't argue. She just reached over, took my hand, and said, "Then we'll handle it." For the first time in weeks, I cried. Not out of pain, but out of relief that someone still believed I could do this. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. I placed a hand over my stomach, still flat, but suddenly so heavy with meaning. "It's just us now," I whispered, "and I'm going to make sure you never feel unwanted." From that moment, something inside me shifted. I didn't feel weak anymore. I had a purpose again. Of course, purpose doesn't pay bills. I found a small apartment in Knoxville. Not much, but it was mine. The kind of place where the heat barely worked and the neighbors fought loud enough for the whole block to hear. But it had a small window that faced east, and every morning, sunlight spilled in like a promise that maybe I could start over. I kept teaching, grading papers until midnight to save money. I learned how to fix leaky faucets from YouTube, how to stretch a week's worth of groceries into 10 days, and how to smile at coworkers who whispered behind my back. One afternoon, I ran into one of Travis's old friends at the grocery store. He looked shocked to see me. "Hey, Elena!" "Wow, how've you been?" "I've been fine," I said, adjusting the basket over my growing belly. He glanced down awkwardly. "Oh, so, You and Travis? Over, I said simply. He nodded, muttered something about being sorry, and walked away. I didn't need his pity. I'd already learned that most people only show up for your wedding, not your rebuilding. As my belly grew, so did my resolve. I talked to the baby every night like he could hear me. I'd tell him about the day, about the weather, about the weird smell in the hallway I couldn't get rid of. It made the silence less heavy. Sometimes, when I'd feel him kick, I'd smile and whisper, "You're proof I wasn't the problem." Labor came early one rainy evening. My mom was out of town, and I drove myself to the hospital because apparently that's what strong women do. Handle things alone. The nurse asked, "Is your husband coming?" I almost laughed. "No, it's just me." Hours later, through pain I didn't think I could survive, I heard the cry. They placed him in my arms, a tiny, squirming miracle wrapped in a hospital blanket. The world went quiet. His eyes opened, dark and calm, and something deep inside me healed right there. I named him Ethan Ward, even though part of me wanted to erase that last name forever. But I decided he deserved to know where he came from, even if it wasn't perfect. When the nurse left, I held Ethan close and whispered, "You're my reason to fight now, in that quiet hospital room." I felt peace for the first time in months. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood something Travis never did. Family isn't about who stays. It's about who shows up. I didn't need a husband. I didn't need his apology. I just needed this little heartbeat in my arms to remind me that sometimes the best revenge isn't hate, it's happiness. And for the first time, I started to believe I might actually find it. Ethan came home from the hospital, wrapped in a hand-me-down blanket, and more love than I thought my heart could hold. The first night, he cried for hours. I rocked him in the flickering glow of a cheap lamp. Humming a lullaby I barely remembered from childhood. Every sound outside, the passing cars, the neighbor's TV, reminded me how small and quiet our little world was now. But it was ours days blurred into a routine of feedings, diaper changes, and exhaustion. There were moments I thought I wouldn't make it. I'd look at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the half-empty fridge, and this tiny human who depended on me for everything, and wonder how single mothers did it. Then Ethan would grip my finger, or sigh in his sleep, and somehow that was enough to keep going. I learned quickly that motherhood doesn't wait for you to feel ready. The world doesn't stop spinning because you're tired. I graded papers while rocking his bassinet with one foot, drank cold coffee for breakfast, and smiled through days when I hadn't slept in 48 hours. The hardest part wasn't the exhaustion, it was the loneliness. There were nights when I'd sit by the window after putting Ethan down, watching the glow from other apartments. I'd imagine families inside, dinners, laughter, warmth. Then I'd glance at the empty chair across from me and remind myself that peace was better than pretending my mom visited when she could, bringing casseroles and unsolicited advice. "You need to rest more," she'd say while folding laundry. "You're going to run yourself into the ground." I'd smile and answer, "Rest is for people who can afford it." Despite everything, there were small victories. The day Ethan laughed for the first time, I almost dropped the phone trying to record it. When his first tooth came in, I cried like I'd just witnessed a miracle. And honestly, I had money stayed tight. My paycheck barely covered rent, so I started tutoring on weekends. Some nights I'd come home so tired I could barely stand. But every time I opened the door and saw Ethan's face light up, it erased the weight of the day I thought about Travis sometimes. Not out of longing, but curiosity. I wondered if he ever thought about us, if he knew he had a son with my eyes and his chin. But I never reached out. What good would it do? He'd chosen his new life, and I was busy building mine. Still, there were moments that caught me off guard. like the time I ran into an old church friend at the grocery store. She glanced at Ethan, smiled politely, and said, "He's beautiful. Is your husband helping much?" I hesitated for half a second before replying, "He's helping by staying out of the way." That became my favorite line. It shut down the pity and gave me back a little control. Years slipped by faster than I expected. Ethan started preschool, learned to say please and thank you, and developed a mischievous grin that made every struggle worth it. Each milestone was proof that I could do this. Proof that being abandoned didn't mean being defeated. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I finally pulled out a box I'd kept hidden in the back of the closet. Inside were the remnants of my old life. Wedding photos, the dried bouquet from our ceremony, the ring he left behind. I looked at each piece and felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, just emptiness, the kind that tells you the wound has finally closed. I slipped the ring into an envelope and mailed it to an address I wasn't even sure he still lived at. I didn't include a note. He didn't deserve one. After that, something shifted inside me. I stopped thinking of myself as a victim. I was a mother, a teacher, a woman who'd been burned and still managed to build warmth out of ashes. That winter, I decorated our tiny apartment with second-hand Christmas lights. Ethan helped hang them, mostly tangling the cords, but his laughter filled the room. When we plugged them in, the whole place glowed. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing inside my own kind of miracle. Later that night, while tucking Ethan into bed, he looked up at me and asked, "Mommy, where's my daddy?" I froze. He'd never asked before. I took a deep breath and sat beside him. "Your daddy and I wanted different things," I said softly, "but you have me, and I'll always be here." He smiled, satisfied with that answer, and drifted off to sleep. I sat there for a long time, brushing his hair away from his forehead, realizing I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Travis, not at Sierra, not even at myself. Life hadn't gone the way I planned, but it was finally moving forward, and this time, I wasn't chasing anyone else's version of happiness. When the sun rose the next morning, I made pancakes from scratch, burned half of them, of course, and laughed so hard Ethan spit juice out of his nose. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have, but it was real and it was ours. And without even realizing it, I'd stopped surviving. I was living again, the first time Ethan called me Mommy in his tiny, stumbling voice. I almost forgot how tired I was. That word, so small, so simple, carried more power than any apology Travis could have ever given by then. 2 years had passed since the night he left. Life had settled into a rhythm that was far from easy, but somehow peaceful. I taught during the day, graded papers at night, and spent weekends chasing Ethan around the park. He loved slides, hated naps, and thought every bird in Tennessee was named Jeff. We didn't have much, but I learned that happiness doesn't need luxury, it just needs purpose. Still, peace has a way of being tested. One morning, I got a letter from the bank. The envelope had that official, heart-stopping look. Inside, it said that Travis had sold the house we once lived in. The one we bought together. The one with my name still on the deed. Or so I thought. Apparently, he'd taken my name off the papers right after the divorce, when I was too broken to notice what I was signing. The house was gone, sold to some couple who'd never know how much laughter and pain those walls had seen. I sat there, holding the letter, feeling that old sting crawl back up my spine. It wasn't about the house, it was the principle. He'd taken everything, the marriage, the future, and now even the place where I'd once believed we'd grow old together. For a moment, the bitterness crept in again. I wanted to call him, to scream, to remind him that I was still here. But then Ethan toddled over, holding his stuffed bear upside down, asking, "Mommy, why bear sad?" I smiled through the ache. "He's not sad, baby. He's just learning to be strong." And in that moment, I realized I was talking to myself as much as to him. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I sat by the window with a cup of cold tea and started writing. Not a letter to Travis, he wasn't worth the ink, but a list. A list of everything I'd survived. Being left, raising a child alone, living on a teacher's salary, learning to smile again. By the time I finished, the list filled an entire page. I folded it, put it in a drawer, and felt lighter somehow, like I'd taken inventory of my strength and finally believed it. Life didn't magically get easier after that, but I started noticing the good things again. The morning sunlight through thin curtains, Ethan's laughter echoing off the walls, the quiet pride of paying rent on time. Sometimes, after I tucked him in, I'd whisper, "We're doing okay, aren't we?" And even though he was too young to understand, he'd murmur, "Okay, Mommy," before drifting to sleep. At school, I got promoted to head of the English department, a fancy title that came with more paperwork and only slightly better pay. But it gave me something I hadn't felt in years: stability. My coworkers started inviting me out again. I usually said no, too tired or too cautious to join. But one Friday evening, after grading midterms and realizing I hadn't talked to an adult outside of work in days, I said yes. We met at a small diner downtown. Between the laughter and the smell of fries, I remembered what it felt like to be part of the world again. One of my coworkers, a woman named Grace, leaned in and said, "You know, Elena, I've always admired you. After everything you've been through, you never complain." I smiled. "That's because complaining doesn't fix the plumbing or buy diapers." She laughed, and for the first time, I joined in without that invisible weight pressing down on me. The next few weeks felt lighter. I started wearing bright colors again, listening to music while cooking, even burning a few dinners just because Ethan wanted to help. Every so often, I'd get flashes of the past, Travis's voice, Sierra's smug smile, but they didn't sting like they used to. They were just ghosts of a life I'd already buried one afternoon. While cleaning out an old box, I found the ultrasound photo from when I first learned I was pregnant. It was faded, but still there, proof that something beautiful had come out of something awful. I put it in a new frame and set it on the nightstand beside a photo of Ethan laughing in a pile of autumn leaves. I looked at those two images side by side and thought, this is what survival looks like. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. That night, as I rocked Ethan to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the strength it gave me. For every door that closed and forced me to find my own way out. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the window. I used to hate rainy nights. They reminded me of the one when Travis walked away. But now, listening to the rhythm, it sounded different. Calmer. Cleansing Ethan stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about his bear, and I smiled, brushing his hair back. The storm outside could rage all it wanted. I finally had peace on the inside. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need anyone to save me. I'd already saved myself. It happened on one of those days when everything seemed to go wrong. Ethan had caught a cold, the car wouldn't start, and the school copier jammed right when I needed to print report cards. By lunchtime, my patience was running on fumes. I sat alone in the teacher's lounge, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt hope, when I heard a voice behind me. "Rough day?" I turned to see a man holding a folder and a smile that felt too calm for a Monday. He was tall, in his mid-30s maybe, wearing a maintenance badge that said Michael Hartman. "Something like that," I said. You? He grinned. The boiler's dying again, so we're all suffering in our own ways. I chuckled. Just a small sound, but it surprised me. I hadn't laughed like that in a while. Over the next few weeks, I saw him around the school fixing things. Door handles, light switches, the ancient vending machine that ate everyone's dollars. He always greeted people by name, remembered details, and had this calm patience that made chaos seem manageable. One afternoon, I was struggling to carry a box of donated books to my classroom. Halfway down the hall, I felt it slipping. Before I could drop it, Michael appeared beside me, catching the box like it weighed nothing. "Need a hand?" he asked. "I think you just saved a small library," I said, catching my breath. He smiled. "Happy to help." He carried the box all the way to my room, then crouched down to stack the books neatly on the table. When he spotted Ethan's picture taped to my desk, he pointed. "Your son?" I nodded. "Yeah, he's 5. He thinks dinosaurs still exist." "Smart kid," he said. "He's technically not wrong. Birds are their cousins." I laughed again. "Great! Now he's going to demand a pet raptor." Something about Michael's energy felt safe. Not the kind of charm that demanded attention, but quiet confidence that came from someone who had known struggle and learned how to stay gentle anyway. Over time, our small hallway conversations turned into short coffee breaks and then longer talks after school. I learned he'd served in the National Guard before working in maintenance. He'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier and was raising his teenage niece. There was a steadiness about him that I didn't realize I'd been craving. One day, as I packed up my things, Michael knocked on my classroom door. "You look like you haven't eaten since the Bush administration," he said. Holding up a takeout bag, I laughed. "You're not wrong." He handed it over. "There's extra fries." No one should fight paperwork on an empty stomach. That night, as I ate those fries sitting at my desk, I caught myself smiling. For no reason, I didn't expect anything from him. Not love, not rescue, not even attention. But his kindness chipped away at the walls I'd built around myself. Weeks turned into months. Sometimes he'd stop by the playground after work, helping Ethan climb the monkey bars, or pretending to be a T-Rex while the kids screamed with laughter. Ethan adored him almost instantly. One evening, Michael offered to drive us home after a parent-teacher event. The sky had opened up, pouring sheets of rain. When he walked us to the car, holding an umbrella big enough to cover all 3 of us, Ethan giggled and said, "You're like a superhero." Michael looked at me, rain dripping off his jacket, and said softly, "He's got your smile." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, one I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Still, part of me was terrified. Every time I started to feel safe, that old voice whispered, "Don't trust it. You know how this ends." But Michael wasn't Travis. He never made promises he couldn't keep. He just showed up over and over again in quiet, consistent ways that mattered more than words. One Saturday, he offered to help fix the loose cabinet doors in my kitchen. Ethan sat on the floor, handing him screws and asking questions like, "Do superheroes use drills?" Michael laughed. "Only on weekends." As he worked, I watched him from across the room. The way he listened to Ethan, the way he focused on small details, and realized how rare it was to see a man who didn't need an audience to be kind. When the cabinet door finally clicked into place, he wiped his hands and looked at me. "There, good as new." I smiled. "You make it look easy." "Nothing worth fixing ever is," he said quietly. Those words stuck with me long after he left that day, here that night. After Ethan had gone to bed, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the freshly repaired cabinet. For the first time, my home didn't feel like a shelter from the storm. It felt alive again. I thought about how far I'd come, about how I'd once believed my story had ended when Travis walked away. But maybe that wasn't the end at all. Maybe it was just the pruning before new growth outside. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like the world had decided to start over too. Ethan mumbled something in his sleep from the next room, and I smiled. The sound of his breathing was my favorite song now. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window. There were still faint traces of the woman who'd once begged her husband to stay. But behind her eyes, there was something new strength. And somewhere deep down, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The first time Michael asked me out, I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I was scared that wanting it meant I hadn't learned my lesson. He showed up after work, still in his Navy maintenance uniform, holding a paper cup of coffee and that patient smile of his. "No pressure," he said. "It's just dinner, not a proposal." I laughed nervously. "You sure about that?" Because the last time someone offered me dinner, I ended up married, divorced, and raising a dinosaur enthusiast. He grinned. "Then we'll call it redemption through lasagna." That line alone was enough to make me say yes. We went to a small Italian restaurant on the edge of town, the kind with mismatched chairs, candlelight, and Sinatra playing softly in the background. It wasn't fancy, but it felt honest. For a while, I just listened. He talked about his niece, his job, his love of hiking. His hands were rough from work, but his voice was gentle, grounded. When he asked about me, I hesitated, then told him the truth. Not the polished version, the real one. I told him about the betrayal, the loneliness, the baby I raised while everyone whispered behind my back. I expected him to look away or change the subject, but he didn't. He just nodded, eyes steady, and said, "You've been through a lot, but it sounds like you never let it break you." Those words landed deeper than I expected. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to see me as more than a survivor. When the check came, he didn't rush to pay or make a show of it. He just said, "Next time, it's on you." Like he already knew there'd be a next time. On the drive home, I caught myself smiling. It wasn't that heady, reckless kind of happiness I'd once mistaken for love. This felt steadier, like standing on solid ground after years of trying to balance on quicksand. After that night, things between us unfolded naturally. No grand gestures, no overthinking, just small moments that built trust. He'd drop by the school with a sandwich when I forgot lunch. I'd bring him coffee when he worked late fixing the gym lights. Ethan started asking when Mr. Mike was coming over, and I had to admit, it wasn't just my heart that was opening again one weekend. He invited us both on a short hike at a nearby nature trail. I hesitated at first, worried it might be too much too soon, but Ethan was thrilled at the idea of an adventure. The day turned out perfect. Clear skies, crisp air, and just enough trail to make my legs burn. Ethan ran ahead, collecting rocks and shouting about dinosaur fossils. Michael walked beside me, matching my pace without saying much. At one point, he offered his hand to help me across a small stream. I could have done it alone, but something about the way he reached out, steady, not assuming, made me take it. His hand was warm, and for a second, I forgot the sound of the water and just felt safe. Later, when we reached the overlook, Ethan climbed onto a rock, arms spread wide. "Look, Mommy!" "I'm king of the mountain." Michael laughed, pulling out his phone to take a picture. I watched them together, my son and this man, who'd somehow become part of our small world, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. On the drive back, Ethan fell asleep in the back seat. I turned to Michael and said softly, "You're really good with him." He shrugged. "He's a good kid. Easy to love." The word hung in the air. Love. I wasn't sure if he meant Ethan or both of us, but either way, it felt like a truth too sacred to unpack in a car. As weeks turned into months, our bond grew deeper. Michael wasn't perfect. He left tools lying around, hummed off key when fixing things, and had a habit of talking to himself when thinking. But his flaws made him real. And real was exactly what I needed. He never tried to replace what I'd lost. Instead, he quietly became part of what I was rebuilding. The first time he met my mom, she studied him for a long moment before saying, "You have kind eyes. That's rare." He smiled. "I try." After dinner, she pulled me aside and whispered, "If you break that man's heart, I'm disowning you." We laughed. But deep down, I knew she saw what I did. Someone who loved without needing to control as our lives intertwined. I learned that love after heartbreak isn't about forgetting the past. It's about finding someone who helps you live beyond it. Michael didn't fill the holes Travis left. He helped me plant something new there. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I walked out to find Michael repairing a broken light fixture in my kitchen. I leaned against the doorway and said, "You know, you don't have to fix everything." He looked up, smiling softly. "Maybe not, but I like trying." When he finished, the light flickered once, then glowed steady. I laughed. "Guess you did it." He stood up, wiped his hands, and looked at me for a long moment. "Elena, can I tell you something?" "Sure. I don't know where this is heading, but wherever it goes." I'm not leaving halfway. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was simple, quiet, and somehow more powerful than any promise I'd ever been given. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the steady hum of the repaired light, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of losing love. Because this time, it didn't come from desperation. It came from healing. And that kind of love doesn't break. It rebuilds. By the time Ethan turned 7, the quiet ache that used to sit in my chest had turned into something softer, something like peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, steady, and mine. Mornings started with the sound of cartoons and burnt toast. Evenings ended with laughter echoing through the apartment as Ethan and Michael built forts out of couch cushions. It was simple, but it felt like home in a way that my old life never truly did. I never thought I'd be able to say this, but I was happy. Genuinely, quietly happy. Michael and I never rushed anything. There were no dramatic gestures or whirlwind promises, just consistent, everyday care. He'd fix a leaky faucet before I could even find the wrench, pack extra snacks for Ethan's soccer games, and leave little notes in my desk drawer that said things like, "You're doing amazing." "Don't forget to breathe." I used to think love had to be loud to be real. Turns out, the quiet kind lasts longer. Ethan adored him, of course. One evening, after Michael tucked him in, I overheard their conversation through the cracked door. "Good night, buddy," Michael said. "Good night, Daddy." The words stopped me cold. Ethan had never called anyone that before. Not me, not even Travis. For a second, I thought Michael might correct him, but he didn't. He just smiled and whispered, "Good night, champ." Later, when I thanked him for handling it so gently, he just shrugged. He can call me whatever makes him feel safe. That was Michael, never asking for anything, never taking more than what was freely given. A few months later, we got married. Nothing fancy, just a small ceremony at a local park, with close friends, my mom, and a very proud Ethan holding the rings. The sun was warm, the breeze soft, and when I said my vows, I meant every word. I didn't promise forever. I promised honesty, kindness, and presence. Because I'd learned the hard way that forever means nothing if someone stops showing up halfway through. After the ceremony, Michael leaned down and whispered, "You look like peace in a wedding dress." I laughed through tears, and Ethan yelled, "Kiss already!" It was the happiest moment of my life, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. We moved into a small house outside Knoxville, where the mornings smelled like pine and the nights were filled with crickets. Michael built a little wooden swing for Ethan in the backyard and painted it blue. Because superheroes like blue, according to Ethan's logic. I'd watch them from the kitchen window sometimes, Michael pushing him higher and higher while Ethan squealed with joy. And I'd think, this is what I prayed for. This is what survival looks like when it blooms. Of course, life didn't turn into a fairy tale overnight. We had our arguments, our bills, our exhausted nights. There were moments when I still flinched if Michael raised his voice, not in anger, just in surprise. And he'd always stop, lower his tone, and say, "I'm not him, Elena." And I knew he wasn't, but healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes love has to walk through the echoes of old pain before it finds peace again. One day, while cleaning the closet, I found an old photo of Travis and me, our wedding day. My hands didn't shake when I looked at it this time. I just stared for a while, realizing how different I'd been. That girl in the picture believed love was a fairy tale. The woman holding the picture now knew love was work. Patient, quiet, faithful work. I tossed it in the trash and felt nothing but relief. Weeks later, Michael and I welcomed our second son, Jacob. The day he was born, Ethan looked at him with wide eyes and whispered, "He's so small." "Can I still be the big brother?" I smiled. "You already are." When the nurse placed Jacob in Michael's arms, I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Pure, unguarded joy. He kissed my forehead and said, "You've given me everything I never thought I'd have again." I laughed softly. Funny. I was about to say the same thing. Those early months with a newborn were chaos. Late nights, spilled milk, and endless lullabies. But somehow, it felt easier this time. I wasn't doing it alone. One night, as I sat feeding Jacob by the window, I watched Michael asleep on the couch, one arm draped over Ethan, both of them snoring softly. The house was small, the floor creaked, the baby cried every 2 hours, but it was perfect, it was mine. Sometimes I'd still think about the past, not with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. The betrayal, the humiliation, the nights I cried until I couldn't breathe, they all led me here, to this life, this peace, this second chance. I used to pray for God to fix my marriage. I thought redemption meant getting back what I'd lost, but He had something better in mind, a future where I didn't have to beg to be loved. Ethan once asked me, "Mommy, how did you meet Daddy Michael?" I smiled. "He fixed things." "Like what?" "The lights," I said softly, "and a few other things I didn't know were broken." He nodded, completely satisfied with that answer. Kids have a way of understanding truth without needing every detail. Now, when I look around our little house, Jacob's toys scattered across the floor, Ethan's drawings taped to the fridge, Michael humming off-key while making breakfast, I see proof that broken things can become beautiful again. Not perfect, just whole. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving a story. I was finally living one worth telling. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of those lazy, sunlit days when everything felt right in the world. Michael had taken Ethan and little Jacob to a local community fair. I tagged along, mostly to take photos and eat funnel cake, not expecting anything more exciting than a toddler meltdown or two. The park was crowded. Music playing, kids running, the smell of popcorn in the air. Ethan tugged at my hand, begging to ride the Ferris wheel. Michael laughed and said, "Go with him, I'll take Jacob to get lemonade." We were halfway through the line when I felt a strange chill. It wasn't the weather, it was instinct, the kind that makes your heart skip for no reason you can name. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Elena?" I turned, and there he was, Travis. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But it was him, same face, just older. The confident man who once walked out of my life now looked smaller, thinner, and tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. His hair was graying at the temples, and the light in his eyes was gone. He took a hesitant step closer. "I thought that was you." I stood frozen, Ethan's small hand still in mine. The sound of carnival music blurred around us. I couldn't speak. I didn't even know what to feel. Shock, anger, pity, all tangled together. "You look different," he said awkwardly. I finally found my voice. "Life tends to do that." He glanced at Ethan, who was busy staring at the Ferris wheel. I saw realization dawn on his face, the way his eyes widened and then softened. "Is he—" I didn't flinch. "Yes, his name is Ethan." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I didn't know." "No," I said evenly. "You didn't want to." For a second, he looked like someone had punched him. He rubbed the back of his neck, that old nervous habit I remembered too well. "You're right. I was a fool. I thought I knew what I wanted, but everything fell apart. Sierra, she wasn't who I thought she was." I said nothing. "She lied about the pregnancy," he continued, words spilling out like a confession. "There was never a baby. She left me 6 months later, took half of everything I owned and disappeared." His voice cracked. "I lost everything, Elena. My job, my house, my peace. And now, seeing you here, with him, it just—" I cut him off gently. "It's not about what you lost, Travis. It's about what you threw away." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You're right." "I have no excuse," Ethan tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy, the line's moving." I smiled down at him. "Go with Daddy, sweetheart. I'll be right there." He ran toward Michael, who was waiting near the lemonade stand, unaware of the emotional earthquake happening just a few yards away. Travis's gaze followed him. "He called that man Dad, didn't he?" "Yes," I said simply. Travis blinked rapidly, trying to hide the tears. "I deserve that." I took a deep breath. Michael's been there for him since he could walk. He's a good father, and a good man. Travis lowered his head. "I can see that." "You look happy, really happy." "I am," I said. It took a long time to get here. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the fair filled the silence between us. Kids laughed, rides clanked, music played. And somehow, that normalcy made the moment feel even heavier. Travis finally whispered, "I'm sorry." For everything. For not defending you, for not believing in you, for throwing away what mattered most. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it. I looked at him, really looked. The man standing before me wasn't the one I'd married. He was a ghost of him, humbled, broken, human. And I realized something that surprised me. I didn't hate him anymore. "Hate's heavy," I said quietly. "I carried it for a long time, but it only hurt me, not you. I forgave you a long time ago, Travis. Not because you asked, but because I needed to live again." Tears filled his eyes. "Thank you. I don't deserve that." "No," I said softly. "But that's what grace is, isn't it?" He nodded, unable to speak. Just then, Ethan came running back, dragging Michael by the hand. "Mommy! Daddy won me a toy car." Travis's head jerked slightly at the word Daddy. Michael approached, reading the situation instantly. He looked at Travis, then at me, his hand settling protectively on my back. "Everything okay here?" he asked, calm but firm. "Yes," I said. "Michael, this is Travis." Michael extended a hand without hesitation. "Nice to meet you." Travis shook it, his voice barely a whisper. "You too." The three of us stood there, an unlikely triangle of past, present, and peace. Ethan, oblivious to the tension, showed Travis his toy car. "Look what my daddy got me!" Travis knelt down slowly, voice trembling. "That's a cool car, buddy." Ethan smiled, then ran off again, laughing. Travis stood, eyes shining with regret. "You did good, Elena. You built something beautiful." "I didn't do it alone," I said, glancing at Michael. He nodded, understanding everything I didn't have to say. Travis took a shaky breath. "I won't bother you again. I just needed to see that you're okay, that he's okay. We're better than okay," I said gently. He smiled faintly, tears streaking down his face. "I'm glad." As he turned to leave, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not triumph, not revenge, just closure. Michael looked at me, his hand still resting on my shoulder. "You all right?" I smiled. "Yeah, I think I finally am," in the distance. Ethan's laughter echoed through the fairground. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky gold and pink. And for the first time, the past didn't feel like a shadow anymore. It felt like a lesson I had already learned. After the fair, life moved forward quietly, as if nothing had happened. But something inside me had shifted. Seeing Travis again didn't reopen wounds. It finally closed them. For years, I'd carried the memory of that night he told me to leave as if it defined me. But standing there with Michael beside me and our children laughing just a few feet away, I realized it didn't anymore. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. It just stopped it from running my future. The following weeks were calm. Work, family, laughter. It all felt lighter. Michael noticed the change. One night, as we sat on the porch drinking tea while the boys chased fireflies, he said, "You've been smiling more lately." I nodded. "It's weird. It's like I can finally breathe again." He reached over, taking my hand. "You've earned it." Ethan came running toward us, holding a jar filled with glowing bugs. "Mom! Dad! Look, they like me!" Michael chuckled. "They're probably just drawn to your energy." I smiled, watching Ethan's grin light up his face. Or maybe they just see a good heart. In that small, ordinary moment, surrounded by the soft hum of crickets and my son's laughter, I felt something I hadn't felt in a decade. Contentment without fear that it would disappear. A few days later, I got a message from Travis. Just a simple text. "Thank you for talking to me that day. I don't expect anything, but I want to be a better man. For whatever it's worth, I'm glad you found happiness." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "Be kind to yourself, Travis." That's how it starts. And that was the last time we ever spoke. Months passed, and our lives kept growing. Ethan started second grade and won a science fair ribbon for building a model volcano. Jacob learned to walk, straight into every wall in the house, and Michael built him a set of baby gates that could probably survive a hurricane. We hosted our first Thanksgiving that year, the house filled with warmth, noise, and the smell of baked turkey. My mom brought her famous sweet potato casserole, and Ethan insisted on saying grace. As we bowed our heads, I listened to my son's small, sincere voice. "Thank you, God, for my family, for Daddy Michael, and for baby Jacob. And thank you for my first dad, even though I don't really know him. Amen." When he finished, the table went quiet for a second. My throat tightened, but not from pain, from pride. Ethan's prayer reminded me that forgiveness wasn't just for me. It was something I was teaching him too. After dinner, as I washed dishes, Michael came up behind me, slipping his arms around my waist. "You know," he murmured, "you've built a pretty amazing life here." I smiled, leaning against him. "We built it." He kissed the side of my head. "Still, I think you're the glue holding us together," I laughed. "Then you're the steady hands that keep it from falling apart." Outside, Ethan and Jacob played with flashlights in the yard, their laughter echoing through the cool autumn night. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I'd learned that peace doesn't mean nothing ever breaks. It means knowing you can rebuild when it does. A few months later, I visited my old church for the first time since everything fell apart. The same pews, the same stained glass, but it felt different now, like walking through a memory that no longer hurt. After the service, an older woman approached me. "Elena, you probably don't remember me. I used to pray for you when you and Travis separated." I smiled gently. "Then you were part of the reason I made it through." She squeezed my hand. "You did more than make it through." You turned ashes into light. Her words stayed with me long after I drove home. That night, I stood in the boys' room, watching them sleep. Ethan's arm was draped protectively over his brother. Their breathing was slow and even, the kind of peace that can't be faked. Michael joined me quietly, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "They've got your strength," he said softly. I shook my head. "No, they've got ours." We stood there in silence, the house filled with that soft, golden stillness that only comes when everything finally feels right. Sometimes I still thought about the girl I used to be, the one who begged her husband not to leave, who believed her life had ended the night he walked out. I wished I could tell her, "Hold on, God isn't done with you yet," because he wasn't. He took the betrayal that nearly broke me and turned it into a testimony. He replaced shame with strength, sorrow with joy, and fear with faith. Now, when people ask me about my past, I don't hide it. I tell them about the heartbreak, the nights I cried until my body ached, the moment I found out I was pregnant and alone, and how, through it all, grace carried me. My story isn't about revenge. It's about redemption, not the kind where the one who hurt you comes crawling back, but the kind where you rebuild yourself so completely that even your scars look like proof of survival. That's the life I live now. Not perfect, but peaceful. Not easy, but blessed. Sometimes, when the house is quiet after everyone's asleep, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and whisper a prayer of gratitude. Not for the pain, but for what came after it. The laughter, the forgiveness, the second chance I never thought I'd have. I've learned that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day that says, "I made it." And I did. My name is Elena Ward, and this is my grace story. How the worst day of my life became the reason I found everything I was meant for. If my story reached you, take this with you. Betrayal doesn't end your story. It just changes the chapter. What you do next is where redemption begins. So tell me, what part of your story are you ready to rewrite? And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful cheating stories and revenge stories that remind us all. Every act of husband betrayal can become the beginning of a woman's redemption. Your next chapter might just be the one where you win.